God was God before Google was Google. So if you wanted information, if you wanted to know how to work, the answer was there if you wanted to look for it.
Welcome to another episode of Resisting Pretense. We are here to have honest conversations about a life of faith in modern culture. Man, that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
It only rolls off the tongue when you do the hand motion, though. If you don't do the hand motion, then you mess it up.
See, there's so much you're missing if you're just listening to the audio.
That's true. That's true. So,
we want to thank our unofficial and unaware sponsor, Diet Coke, for supplying us with the energy to make it through the podcast.
And for those of you that do a YouTube, it doesn't say Diet Coke, but it is Diet Coke. I promise in the cups.
We had to go with the Circle K version today because I'm caffeine free this week for stupid reasons.
And Circle K doesn't sell caffeine free Diet Coke in the bottle.
This is really important stuff for your life of faith in modern culture.
I agree.
We have one other shout out Scott wanted to make. Go ahead.
We have a member in our church named Scott Hall who makes these incredible thump mats out of paracord.
Other people like to call them coasters.
Well, and I asked him about that, and I said, "So Scott, tell me why it's a thump mat." And he says, "So when you lay your coffee cup or something on it, you don't get the sound,
the thump that they're hearing in their mic."
Well, that's only because we're on a flimsy plastic table. You know that makes up all the difference. And so. So Clark is using his thump mat to hold his water. We're using ours to use our Diet Coke drinks in Circle K cups.
That's right.
So
we're joined today by Clark Webb. Clark is the boss of my bosses.
Yeah, with twice the pay.
Yeah. Clark is an elder here at Stone Ridge. Has been off and on an elder since, like the 90s?
97, I think, or 98, something like that.
Yeah. And so Clark and I have known each other 27 years, something like that.
Yeah.
You guys are old.
We are old.
No, just experienced.
Yeah, there you go.
Or experiencing old.
Yes. Mm-hmm. However you want to phrase it.
And we've had in this series, in the Back in My Day series, we've had at least a couple people that were church staff through their decades of watching changes in church and culture. Clark comes into this as a key leader, but a volunteer, a lay leader in his church engagement, and he's been. How long have you worked for Gowan?
Doing company 24 years.
Okay, so you've been in the agriculture science business for at least that long.
Yeah, well, 36 in Yuma and probably 10 or 12 before that.
Wow.
Grew up in a cotton gin in a cotton field.
Wow. So you pretty much your whole life.
Yeah, I don't know anything else.
Yeah.
So you were dyed in the cotton.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A couple of times, I think.
You're just so proud of yourself. Like the look on your face. Look what I said.
Better than being dyed in the wool.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, that's kind of the pun I was going for. I guess I've just got dad jokes on my...
No, I got it. I live with Kimberly, and she's a pun queen. So,
all right. Well, Clark, for people that may not know you well, why don't you kick us off with just sharing a little bit of like your background, faith story?
I was. My parents were members of First Southern Baptist Church in Buckeye, and when I was born, they had what was called a cradle roll. And when I was about 10 days old, I was put on the cradle roll. And so I've been plugged into a Southern Baptist church in depth my whole life. I spent the first 30 years of my life in First Southern Buckeye, and I've spent the balance of my life in First Southern Stone Ridge, Yuma. So I don't have a lot of church experience other than those two churches.
Yeah.
So I don't know how other people do things, but I just like the comfort and the consistency of finding a place to stay, even if you may not agree with everything you hear. You find a place to stay and you plug in.
I like that.
But my faith
I wish
story.
we saw more of that.
Well, and I'm too lazy to move. That's why I don't want to
Now
learn.
the real story.
I don't want to
comes
learn another culture.
Yeah.
I was saved when I was about 7.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 5, we moved about 20 miles from Buckeye, kind of basically out in the middle of nowhere. My dad ran a cotton gin, and that's where the gin was.
Mm.
The pastor at the time, if there's any old Southern Baptists left out there, and maybe even some from Oregon, might recognize the name Dan Stringer. Dan was the Southern Baptist mission coordinator or something like that in Oregon after he left the church in Buckeye. Now, when you get to the Buckeye, when I grew up, not Buckeye like it is now. So when you
it's just a sleeper community for Phoenix now.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just a bedroom community. I don't know.
That was the right word.
Okay, well, that'll work. It was about a 30-minute drive from town to our house, and it was dark. When you get to about where the prison is on Highway 85, you turn back to the west, go another 4 or 5 miles, and then you got to my house. And it was dark. But Dan drove to the house and came to talk to a 7-year-old boy about what he felt he knew and understood about being saved. And they decided I knew what I was talking about, probably for the last time in my life.
I don't think so.
And so I was baptized at 7. Church was an integral part. We had Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And in the summertime, the only time I got to town from the time school was out until school started was Sunday, Wednesday, and every 2 weeks going grocery shopping in Phoenix, which was a 2-hour drive almost to get to a grocery store from where we were. So it was an all-day affair. So I didn't have a lot of company at the house. And looking back over the years, the company that we had that weren't direct relatives were people from our church. And so that was church.
That's central then for you.
It was.
Yeah.
It was central. Those are the people that I saw. As I grew up, I stayed pretty much involved in church. Like I said, Wednesday night, as I got after my freshman year in high school, I started working part-time. And my dad and mom worked together for 30 years, which I think was probably and stayed together, and were together till they passed away, which is an achievement in and of itself.
Right.
So it was difficult for my mom and dad to get me back and forth during school. My dad would start work at 5 in the morning, and sometimes not get home till 7 that evening. 7 days a week from the middle of September till 1st of February. So in those times, it was just my mom and my brother and me. And my brother's 7, almost 8 years younger than me. So by the time I got into high school, for me to play sports or do something like that it was a difficult move to come to town every day and get me.
Right.
So I just went to work. I wanted to buy a better car than my mom and dad could give me. Bought my first car at 14 because I needed to get back and forth to work, and worked around men. I was around men or adults far more than I ever was around people my own age. So it shaped me, or depending on who you talk to, warped me. So you can imagine being 14, 15 years old. I was a terrible tractor driver, far better mechanic and irrigator. After a couple of years or so, they finally decided I was worth pouring some effort into. So that's how I started my ag deal was from them. But working after school and on weekends, there were times when I was in high school, I didn't get to church for probably 3 or 4 months. Unless it happened to rain or something like that, then I could go. But it was always like, in some ways, as comfortable as going home. It was the same group of people. We had new people come, we had people go, but pretty steady base of people that had effectively seen me grow up. When I got out of school, when I graduated, I went to church primarily because that's what you did on Sunday. And I didn't really want to have to explain to anybody why I wasn't there, because you would be conspicuous by your absence. So I went out of habit, for a long time, and then kind of got back involved a little bit more, and it plugged back in. I mean, I was just kind of floating around the edges, plugged back in. But the support I got from the adults in church, I was probably 14, And the big thing for a kid in that church was to be able to take the offering and serve communion. So at about 14, they started letting me do that. So they were very good at including me in what happened. So that helped forge that connection a little bit more. I saw in a lot of ways how I think we should treat young people and young Christians as they come through. Give them what they're willing to do and let them handle it.
Yeah.
If they drop the ball, if they drop the plate, which was a fear, even worse, it was dropping the communion grape juice on some lady's brand new Sunday go to meeting dress. But even that's not, even that you won't die from that. But that was just part of it. It's just in a long ways being willing to do stuff, but being around people who would let you do. And if you messed up, for the most part, it was just like, okay, just don't do that again. Just find your own way. It's one thing my dad told me probably one of the most important things he told me. We had a lot of time to talk. It was 30 minutes from town to home. And for some reason, Dad didn't like air conditioners in vehicles.
In Arizona.
In Arizona, yeah. He just came from West.
It wasn't as hot back then.
No, it was
climate change, right?
It wasn't as hot, but I don't think we were quite as used to being cooled as we are now. But one of the things he told me is, he said, I can show you and teach you and let you understand what I think the Bible says to me. He said, there's going to be a time come where you have to pick it up and make it your own. And I was probably 16 or 17. I said, what if I don't particularly agree with you? He said, well, that's fine. He said, as long as you can support your position, he said, then that's just part of picking it up and making it your own. And I think that's what sometimes we'll probably get to this later in culture. Now I don't know that I see people picking it up and making it theirs. That's part of that personal connection that you have to have. You have to pick it up and make it yours.
That's a good segue into talking about culture. And I want to start with the wider, just like American culture. We'll probably spend a little bit more time on church culture, but just from your perspective, the things that stand out to you as some of the biggest changes in our culture you've seen in your lifetime.
I think the biggest change I've seen is everybody that has a smartphone or a computer thinks they have a valid opinion.
You mean we don't?
I don't know. I have I will confess I'm on Twitter. I don't think I've sent anything out or done anything on it for years, but it's kind of where I pick up 2 or 3 different news feeds so I can kind of figure out which part of this mess is actually supposedly true. But just because someone has an opinion about something, and we most all do, doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the world needs to hear it. And it's easy to hide behind a keyboard and be pretty brassy. If you have that same amount of brass when I'm sitting across a table from you, then it's a little easier for me to accept it. But if you put something out there and somebody pushes back with you a little bit and you just drop out or you start name calling, then I just don't really have a lot of use for that. But it's just mind numbing, the information that's out there.
Yeah.
Right now, if you look at a pesticide label, you can pick up your phone and Google it and read the pesticide label and find the pests, the rates, and different things that you need to have. 35 years ago, I asked an older guy about a rate, and he looked at me and he said, well, the books are over there. You're a lot of help.
Yeah.
But that was part of the same thing of picking that up. And he said, if you go look for it, it's yours. So if you put a little effort into something, then it's easier to own it.
That's interesting. The ease of information almost makes it feel cheap.
Yeah.
And I haven't had that conversation in a long time. At the same time, there's sometimes like just mind-blowing things. My wife and son and I went out to a movie last night, and it was based on a movie from, I don't know, 20 years ago. And we were on the drive home talking about the movie and saying, oh, was that in the first one? And like, oh, I don't know. And there used to be like arguments and things about, I always call them barroom arguments, like, bets people would make. This guy was a better baseball player than he had better batting average than that guy, and like they could argue about it, but nobody really knew. And then my son's in the back seat on his phone, like, oh yeah, that was in the other movie. Like all the details, he could just pull them up on his phone. And
it takes a lot of the mystery and fun out of life.
And conversation.
Yeah. But I think along with that comes a wide-ranging apathy. That because we can get these things out there that we think, that we feel, that we just want to talk about, but yet there's no person-to-person self-connection, and I think that drives apathy, because you get to the point where my opinion is the only one that's valid, because you don't have to change your opinion, but you have to be willing to listen to someone else's opinion and understand that they don't have to agree with you, and be able to go on and live that way instead of losing your mind and having a fit.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting connection between the ownership that you feel when you've worked hard to learn something, rather than just kind of like have an answer handed to you.
Yeah.
That ownership, I think, does connect with engagement, and to me, apathy is like disengagement.
Yeah.
And probably easy to. I don't know that I've really connected all those dots before. How easy it is to be disengaged when you haven't had to work hard to be to have information or to have something at your fingertips. That's fascinating.
And I think that's an important point to say that so much of what happens now, I mean, if you go on to X or Twitter or whatever the latest label for it is, you're really reading other people's opinions. And then if you share that same opinion, you might say, well, it must be true because this person said it. And so you state it as being fact. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is that, if you had to look, in the Bible, you couldn't just say, well, I think the Bible says.
Yeah.
You actually had read it and looked at it and studied it and went, oh, this is what it says. And so truth came from my actual study of it, not just believing some preacher or some opinion or something like along those lines. And I think a lot of times people will say, well, the Bible says because this preacher said it, not because I read it.
I actually went and found it.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that it allows us to do is to enter into a situation or a conversation looking for confirmation bias. You look for things that shore up what you believe, whether they're true or not. And you can go in and look in the Bible with a confirmation bias. And sometimes you can get it. Sometimes you have to then reframe what you're looking for. And just because when you read through it says it reaches you at some point in your life, the next time you read through it, our lives go on, our situations change. And sometimes the same verse that meant one thing to you 2 years ago may have a wider impact on your thinking in your life, and you have to be open for that.
Yeah. Are there things in culture different now than early in your life that you think are good changes?
I think that's the other side of the information being out there. Good changes. It's not really in my personality. I didn't spend enough time thinking about it.
I knew this would be a stretch for you.
No, it's tough. Again, I'm an information geek. I like information. I like to pull through stuff. But yeah, I think that's the other side of that double-edged sword. Is there is enough information out there that if you go in studiously with an open mind, there are a lot of things out there that we can pick up and understand that we could never know before. If you want to know the economy or the political situation in Brazil, now you can find out. And if you want to know, if you're in LA and you want to know what's going on in Halifax, Nova Scotia, you can find out.
Yeah.
And it's just
so easy.
It's just like it's just like food. You can eat food to survive. One friend of mine told me, he said, you can either eat to live or live to eat. And sometimes information can be that way.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot to the church. And what are some changes you've noticed in church life that stand out to you as significant?
Mostly would be music.
Mm-hmm.
It may come to the hundreds of people who listen to your podcast, growing into thousands now.
I like the way he thinks.
I love it. Yeah.
It might surprise people to know that I sang in the choir for probably 6 or 7 years.
That actually surprises me.
Yeah.
Because the choir was gone before I got here.
Yes,
so.
the choir was gone. I never sang here.
Okay.
I sang in, actually I did. I sang in a Christmas thing or something.
I do remember this. I remember you being on the drama team.
Was I on the drama team?
You did. I'm pretty sure you did at least one or two.
That's news to me.
No, are you sure?
Kimberly led the drama team.
I thought I remembered you being in a sketch in the old building.
I might have stood there.
That's what I'm thinking. Is he a tree? Was he a tree? A rock? What?
That's what I did in the one in Buckeye. I just stood there and held a little flintlock rifle and stood real quiet. And,
I may have concocted that memory.
That's good. That's possible. I don't know. I may just take it and run with it. I don't know. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of people are the situation that happened when I got sick. There's a number of things that happened before that I'm a little fuzzy about.
Mm.
So back to your choir days.
Yes. We had. We did Christmas cantatas. Sang on Sunday. Had practice on Wednesday night. I was somewhere between a low baritone and a high bass, just depending on where they needed me. They tried to make me sing.
How much you'd been yelling at your kids that week?
I didn't have any kids. I was by myself.
Oh, okay.
Might have been how many cigars I had.
Yeah.
You need a really low bass. I'll go buy a cigar and see if I can't get you there. And one of the things that made it, I've always liked music. I grew up on country western music. That's what my folks listened to. Wandered off a little bit into a little bit of rock and roll music off and on. Guitar, I like blues, screaming guitars. Sometimes one guy looked at me one time and said, "I don't know how you can put those two together, Christianity and blues guitar." And I said, "You haven't been a Christian very long." Because if you don't think blues enter your life, just because you're a Christian, then you haven't really run into some of the things the rest of us have.
So I just got to share real quick, just because it always made me happy, is that we had a guitar player here that would oftentimes use a slide on his guitar. And so we would get to the end of service, and giddy is not the word I would use with you, but it's as close as I can get.
It's always as close as I'll ever get.
Yeah. At the end of service, he was just excited. It was just like, okay, I'm good for the week. Yep. I am like filled up,
ready to go.
Yeah, it was just it always.
Oh yeah, and like any week we have a good solid guitar presence. I can see like either C or Clark will come up to me like, that was a good one.
Yeah, not real expansive when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I can't say that I dislike the hymns. Whenever we'd stand up at church, grab your hymnal, open to 364. We're going to sing the first, second, and fourth verses.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's how I grew up.
Huh? Yeah, was it?
Yeah.
And again, it was like a blanket. It's comfortable. It's easy. I knew the words. I knew the musical deal. I could sing the bass lines without the music. So it was comfortable. And I was asked once or twice whenever we were doing when our band now does a hymn that's a little bit different. It's fine.
I was going to ask you, if you didn't bring that up, I was going to ask you, because I grew up with the hymns, and a lot of them I still like. I like some of them. I'm like, I'd be fine if I never heard that one again. Because some of them I just think musically are weird or not interesting. But I still think there's some really great ones out there. But I actually like it when somebody puts a new spin on one. And and I don't mind, like, I've talked to people who say I don't like it when they change the melody. I don't know that it matters to me. I just like hearing a modern take on something that's that familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes they might totally rewrite it, and I'm like, and then I'm curious, like, what did they do with it? And then sometimes all they do is like add a chorus to an existing hymn. But it kind of feels like it brings it into a modern context, because a lot of the hymns are just verses with no chorus.
Yeah.
And most of our music today has chorus. So it just feels like it modernizes something and gives you a way to reflect on the message of the song before you just start heading into more of it. And so yeah, I always enjoy that. But I was curious if you were in the don't change, like just play it with a piano camp, or go ahead, play around with it camp.
I just play around with it. People are not the same as they were when I was singing those songs 40, 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't write them in stone. And if they did, it's refreshing. It's refreshing. Do I like all the changes? No. Am I a fan of I don't know what you call them. Oh, praise like stuff. They say the same thing over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I go along with them. Some I like. Some it's just, there's one in particular. I think if I ever hear again, I'm going to blow my brains out. But we won't go there right now.
We don't normally consider this a violent podcast.
Well, you don't normally have had me on your content. I use expressions sometimes that are probably a little bit out there, but no, I don't mind it. I think the spirit of what's in there, it would be like listening to one cantor sing a hymn or a psalm, and then hear another one sing the same psalm with a different incantation or a different flow or something like that.
Yeah,
the meat's still there.
Right.
So you said that you think that's probably the biggest cultural change in church has been our music. Has that been
or a big one?
Or a big one?
Yeah.
Has that been a good change or a bad change, or or has it just been a change?
To me, it's just been a change. I mean, it was a big adjustment for me to make, but I've made it. I'm okay. And one of the things I've tried to put myself is if I'm in a situation and I'm not 100% behind what's going on, I can't let it affect my worship. My worship is my worship, and if I allow a broken string on a guitar or a note that's not quite as clear or as resonant as I'm used to hearing, I can't allow that to. This is coming from a guy with hearing aids. I can't allow that to to distract what the worship is about. My worship, they are leading worship. You decide to come along or you don't. And if you find a reason not to come along, you'll find another reason the next time. The other big shift that may or may not be true, and it's difficult because of the volunteer level in our church, which is astronomical, is I don't see that as much as I used to. My mom ran the nursery at that church for probably 40 years. And the way my mom got volunteers is when you brought your kid in. My mom would take the information down, and the next thing she'd say to you is, "When are you working?" And they say, "Well, I really don't like working with kids." And she says, "Not everybody likes working with kids, but if your kid's in here, we need you to work. If you need to be part of what your kid's doing." And my mom had a velvet hammer kind of approach. And so, that's, I don't know that that's still out there anymore, but it just seems to me, and I could be wrong, it just seems to me that the church ran with far more volunteers than it seems to now. Again, I've experienced in two churches, so I don't have a wide ranging well to draw from.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I have the data to confirm or deny that.
I don't know. Again, that's more of a feeling, a shift that I think I see.
Yeah.
And I am hopefully, and again, we don't lack for volunteers here when something comes along. So that may not be a right perception. And if it isn't, that's okay. So,
Well, and I think there was, I don't remember the time that you're talking about with your mom.
mm-hmm.
I wasn't part of the Christian, being part of the Christian church at that time. But I do remember, when I first started coming here, the whole idea of, we want you to serve.
Mm-hmm.
You need to serve. But if you don't like kids, don't serve in the minute. We need people working in kids ministry. But if you don't like kids, that is not where you need to serve. But that's also not a reason to say no to not serving. It just means you need to find that next place.
I didn't love my time in the nursery. But Sharon Puckett reminded me a little bit about my mom. It's like, oh, your kid's here. You need to at least be plugged in enough to know what's going on. And for some reason, when we were in the little kids, by 35 minutes into the sermon, I would probably have 2/3 or 3/4 of the kids asleep, changed to sleep, fed, boom, they're out. And I'm sitting over there reading the book. And right across the way, they're herding toddlers and doing everything else. And I'm just sitting there reading the book because mine are asleep, And one lady came up and said, well, I really don't want you to put him down because he won't sleep when he gets home. I said, when he gets home? He said, not my problem.
I love it. Anything else in church life that really stands out as big change to you?
I think John touched on it a little bit, and I liked his. Listen to John McMurrin's podcast if you haven't. When I was a kid, he had a white shirt and a clip-on tie, and I haven't worn a tie more than 5 times in the last 30 years. I don't necessarily know that, but the casualness that church seems to have taken on, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily know that the way a person dresses and comes to church correlates with their spirituality or their depth or their understanding. But it does look different from what it used to.
You have a fascinating, because you're, at least in Stone Ridge life, you're famously the gruff. Clark Webb is famously gruff at our church, but having known you for so long and known your kids and you're and everything, most people would associate gruff with judgmental, and that's not true about you. You have this fascinating way of being, the quote unquote gruff is just direct, but there's often just this is just my opinion, might be right, might be wrong.
Well, I've been wrong so much of my life that it's
that how you got there?
Yeah. Well, when you work in agriculture, you can have the best thing in the world lined up, and all of a sudden a little bit of rain or a little bit of wind or something, you have to recalibrate and move on. I think that's why they keep me around, is I know more about what not to do than I do what to do. But the gruff part is I lived by myself for probably 9 years, from till Kimberly and I got married when I was 30. I worked by myself. Our job is solo. I drove by myself, went to school by myself, I lived by myself, and I got really used to having things my way. And if it wasn't going to be my way, I had a car, I'd leave. But I think a lot of that, obviously, when you marry and when you have kids, if that doesn't change, it makes for a really difficult life. And I think one of the things over the years that I've learned is, if I can treat my kids, or if I can treat the people around me the way that God has treated me, then I can live easier. I've walked around mad. I walked around mad for a long time, and it just made me tired. Then I was mad because I was tired. But it
that sounds like a cycle.
Oh yeah. It took me a long time to get to understand that I don't have to be right. I don't even have to have an opinion. There are things that are in the Bible that are right and things that are wrong. The right and wrong are probably 2 or 3 at the most concepts that are absolutely unequivocally true, and most of the rest of them are for wrestling. But and sometimes there's a saying that gets used quite a bit that actually came from Vietnam. This is what hill are you going to die on? And because they were constantly taking.
That's from Vietnam.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Because they would take these hills and they'd spend 4 or 5 days trying to fight up these hills, and they could take casualties and everything else, and then 6 weeks later they'd walk off and leave them. And so it was, what hill are we going to die on? It could be wrong.
Okay. That's a fascinating segue into the kind of the final question of how do we effectively speak into today's culture? How do we represent Jesus well today in today's culture? It almost sounds like you've already started answering the question, but
I think we are, in one aspect, we are called to be the hands and the feet and the voice of Jesus and God here. And the more we understand what those reactions are and how they reacted by pouring through the Old Testament and understanding how God dealt in effectively a Holy Spirit-less world, and then the change that happened after Pentecost when the Holy Spirit came in, that gives us a direct line of communication to God. So it's always there. God was God before Google was Google. So if you wanted information, if you wanted to know how to work, the answer was there if you wanted to look for it.
I want a T-shirt that says that. God was God before Google was Google.
I like it.
I love it.
Works for me. I don't even want a royalty. But I think now the easiest way, the most effective way to do it is live our lives in a way that when things happen around us and people see us, that there's a serenity and a peace and a calmness that we know only comes from God. To walk through, I haven't had to walk through the death of a child. My parents did. And they buried one of my brothers, when he was a month old, the day he turned a month old.
Wow.
And in those days, you didn't talk about that. The common thought was, well, you never really got connected with that child. There's really nothing to miss. But when a child would be injured or hurt at church, my mom was generally one of the first ones there, because she'd been there. She'd walked it. And she said, it's okay to hurt. It's okay to cry. It's okay to miss that child. That child was part of your family, especially to the mother, even before it was born. But I think to be able to react that way, and then that could lead to a conversation of, I don't know how you got through that so well. He said, the only reason I got through that was because I know that I have a Savior. I know where I'm going, and he walked me through it. He walked through it with me. That's where that comes from. And a practical application of that, if we can live that out in our lives, and then have that door open or gently push it open and say the reason I can do this is because I know I'm loved, I know I'm saved, and I'm in his hand. I may not like where I'm at. Just because I'm peaceful and serene about it doesn't mean I like it. It just means that for some plan that I don't quite understand yet, this is where I'm supposed to be. Or this is where I ended up, however it might have been. Where there was circumstances come on us that we don't ask for. Circumstances come on us that we beg for by the things that we do and the way we react. And just because we are forgiven and just because we are loved, there's no guarantee that we're not going to have hard times. In fact, I think it's probably the opposite could be true. A Christian should expect not only the physical attacks, but the spiritual attacks as well. And the physical attacks, while unhandy and difficult, can sometimes not hold a candle to what the spiritual attacks can do to you, because they can crush you in a way that the body can't.
Yeah. Wow, that's a good word. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
How I'll give you a final shot. Just this whole conversation that we've been having. If there's one thing a thought you could leave people with, anything you'd want to add?
The only thing I would add is, if you have a Savior, when you have your Savior, understand the cost that he paid, the price that he paid. He went through every temptation that was conceivable to man. If I've told Christians that Jesus had to have been tempted sexually, because if he wasn't, he couldn't have been that sacrifice. So there's nothing that he didn't endure, and he found a way through it, and he's there to help us find a way through it as well. So just hang on to that we know who he is.
That's good. Well, thank you, and we've got one more in this series.
No,
yes,
this is the end.
Oh, this is the end.
Yeah, because the other wouldn't commit.
Okay.
No, I want to talk about the past, I guess. I don't know.
I would double you. I'm used to being last.
I've loved this series, and then I think last week, was it you or was it Sam that suggested? It
was me. That we need to flip the switch on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and do a series with like what would be Gen Z now. What did you name it though? It wasn't back in my day. It was
Okay, Boomer.
No, I thought that was gonna be the subtitle for this one.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're right.
So we'll get to work on a new series. But this has been a treat. So thanks again, Clark.
Thank you.
The quote of the series: God is God before Google was Google.
That's right.
Yep.
All right. Till next time.